Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Strategic Planning Committee today. We'll kick straight off with the agenda. We've got quite a lot to get through. So first is the membership of the committee. Other members are here. We don't have Councillor Moore, so he's the only person missing. Item 2, minutes of the previous meeting. Is everybody happy with those minutes? Agree those? Okay. So number 3, declarations of interest and lobbying. Can we just go around if there are any interests or declarations to make?
Yeah, none, Chair.
None, Chair.
None, Chair.
None, Chair.
None, sir.
None as well, Sheila. Thank you. Okay, and then item 4, admission of the public. So this is a public meeting. Obviously, we've got a number of members of the public joining us, and we're on the webcast. So thank you for coming. Public questions, Sheila?
No questions, Chair.
Let's do this now. Yeah. And deputations and petitions?
No deputations or petitions, Chair.
Okay. So yeah, we've got some planning applications to look at. We did do 2 site visits this morning. And so we can move straight on to item 10, which is the first planning application. Over to you, Victor.
Thank you, Chair. Victor Grayson, Development Management Master Planner in the Majors and Minerals team. This is item 10 on today's agenda. It's an application for full planning permission for a residential development of 62 dwellings at Cliff Hill, Denbydale. Members will be aware that this site has some planning history. Most recently, an application for residential development at this site came to this committee last year and was refused. This newer application is a resubmission of that previous application with the same layout, same number of units, although some additional information has been submitted this time, which I'll come back to. That previous application is now the subject of an appeal which is ongoing, and we don't yet know when that appeal will be determined. In the meantime, this newer application has been submitted, and just to clarify to members, there is no barrier in planning law or guidance that prevents the Council from considering and determining this newer application whilst the appeal relating to the previous application is ongoing. And in fact, the Government expects local planning authorities to determine applications without delay, and this newer application is now ready to be determined. So I'll crack on with the presentation. Apologies, some members will have seen most of what I'm going to talk about today twice before, but for some of you this will be new. A little bit more of the planning history of this site is here. Jumping further back than the last application, this slide summarises the 7 reasons why the previous to the previous application, that is, for the 48 dwelling scheme was refused in 2023. The committee report summarises the key changes that were made by the last applicant, to address these 7 reasons for refusal. And as set out in the latest committee report, further information has been submitted by the applicant regarding the reasons related to site remediation and removal of material from the site. And then this is the Council's reason for refusal for the application that was determined last year. That's the application that's now the subject of the appeal. Members will recall that this committee had concerns regarding the groundworks, the removal of coal and remediation of the site, the number of vehicle movements associated with the remediation of the site, and the environmental impacts arising from that development. There was also concern regarding the unknown conditions beneath the site and the related lack of clarity regarding what the environmental impacts of the development would be. And finally, there were concerns that it had not been demonstrated that the site was suitable for residential development. There are key differences between the last application and the current application, i.e. the refused application that's now at appeal and the current application that's now before this committee. Firstly, the applicant has submitted a document prepared by RSK Geosciences, which the applicant has referred to as a peer review. This supports the applicant's assertion and officer's advice that the site investigation carried out by the previous applicant team was normal, proportionate and adequate for the purpose of assessing and determining a planning application. Also, a unilateral undertaking has been submitted. Essentially, this promises to not sell or burn any coal that is removed from the site, and members will have seen that there is some further commentary in yesterday's committee update regarding the enforceability of this unilateral undertaking. New biodiversity net gain information has been submitted, so mandatory BNG applies to this application but didn't apply to the previous application, although members will be aware that the council was nonetheless applying local plan policies to that previous application to secure a 10% BNG. An updated housing land supply and housing delivery position now applies. This is summarised at paragraph 11.2 onward in the committee report. In short, Kirklees is now in a worse position regarding housing delivery than it was when the previous application was determined. A revised MPPF was published in December, which generally promotes the delivery of more housing. And then another key difference between the current and the previous application is in relation to the number of representations. For this current application, we've received 158 representations, all of which were objections to the proposals, whereas with the previous application, 56 were received. So that's the preamble. I'll now describe the site and explain what is actually proposed under this new application. As I said, it is a resubmission, so members will know, most members will know what's coming. This is a proposal for a residential development of 62 dwellings at the largest part of the allocated site, that's HS144, that's the site allocation, which is allocated for residential development in the local plan. In this slide, the plan on the right-hand side shows the site allocation in orange. The area labelled A is the current application site. This covers the larger part of the site allocation as well as 2 slithers of land along the Cumberworth Lane frontage. B is a separate site that has planning permission for 10 dwellings. C also has a separate planning permission granted and has in fact been developed. 6 dwellings have been built there in a new gated cul-de-sac named Springhead Gardens. And then finally D is the last part of the site allocation where an application for outline planning permission for residential development of 13 dwellings is currently under consideration. The application site is approximately 1.9 hectares in size. It slopes downhill from north to south towards the centre of Denbydale. It's a greenfield site. It's currently grassed agricultural land with some trees and hedgerows. Surrounding land is in agricultural and residential use. The green belt and a public footpath border the site to the north, or to the northwest rather, and to the west is the Grade 2 listed Wesleyan Methodist Church. Here are some long views of the site. These 2 images illustrate how the site is visible in the wider landscape. So the committee bus did stop in these 2 locations, so members will have seen these 2 views earlier today already. The top image is the view from Barnsley Road on the opposite side of Denbydale, overlooking another allocated site which this committee will be considering later today. Members can see the Wesleyan Methodist Church, to the right of which is the application site. Members can also see Springhead Gardens, that was area C in the earlier slide. And then the bottom image is another view from Barnsley Road further to the west, overlooking the Churchfield open space. Again, members should be able to see the Wesleyan Methodist Church as well as the relatively recent East Hill Way development. These are views of the west end of the site, showing Cumberworth Lane, the site's frontage to the road, and the Wesleyan Methodist Church. And then on this slide, the first image in the top left is the view of the track to the north of the application site where it meets Cumberworth Lane. This track carries a public footpath northeastwards towards Leakhall Lane. Then moving clockwise around this slide, we see a view looking south into the site from the public footpath, and then an image of the TPO protected oak tree that exists within the site, and then finally a view from the public footpath looking south across land that was annotated as D in the earlier slide, and you can see a house on the left. That's a house in Leakhall Crescent where the committee site visit bus stopped this morning. These 4 images show existing dwellings adjacent to the application site. The top 2 images show dwellings that were mentioned in the previous reasons for refusal, the application before the last one, that is. Crook Cottage is a single-storey dwelling to the south, and the dwellings of Springhead Gardens to the southeast are also seen here. Dwellings on Chapel Court are located to the southwest of the application site and are accessed from Cumberworth Lane, and then dwellings in the bottom right image are accessed via the track to the north of the application site. Shown here is the applicant's topographic survey, which illustrates how the site slopes downhill, albeit with a mound towards the centre of the site close to the public footpath. And the applicant's proposed layout is shown here. This is, as I said, this is the same layout that was proposed in the previous application. A single vehicular point of access is proposed from Cumberworth Lane, from which an estate road would extend into the site, splitting into two arms in response to the site's topography. At the end of each arm, pedestrian connections to the adjacent public footpath are proposed. A mix of detached, semi-detached and terrace properties is proposed. They would comprise 3 one-bed, 12 two-bed, 24 three-bed and 23 four-bed properties. Publicly accessible open spaces are proposed around the site's TPO protected tree and above the proposed surface water attenuation tank and either side of the proposed site entrance. The 3 red crosses on this plan denoted the locations of historic mine entries. Come back to those shortly. And then this slide shows a sample of the 10 house types that are proposed by the applicant. 2-storey dwellings are proposed across the site, although 8 units would have 3-storey rear elevations due to the site's topography. Pitched roofs are proposed across the site. The majority of the dwellings would be built of artificial stone. However, 4 dwellings at the west end of the site, nearest to the listed building, would be of natural stone. The development site entrance shown here is proposed off Cumberworth Lane. It would have new footways either side, facilitating safer movement for pedestrians along this part of Cumberworth Lane, where there currently is no footway. Taking into account traffic speeds outside the application site, the visibility displays proposed either side of the site entrance are adequate. Highways Development Management officers are satisfied with these proposals in terms of highway safety. Just as a note, the recommended acceptance of the access point coming off Cumberworth Lane is recommended, not because the previous applicant was unable to acquire land to the north. Its acceptance is recommended because the design of this site entrance is acceptable in highway safety terms. Regarding other highway issues, Highways Development Management officers have also advised that the proposed internal layout and resident and visitor parking is acceptable. Regarding the 2 reasons for refusal, that's of the 2023 refusal, which related to overlooking of neighbouring dwellings. The previous applicant moved the relevant dwellings away from those neighbours. These drawings now illustrate the proposed relationships in plan and also in section. With regard to Crook Cottage, the topography and intervening boundary treatments would prevent overlooking of the rear windows of that single-storey dwelling, despite less than the expected 21-metre distance being maintained between the relevant elevations. This slide illustrates the appropriate locations proposed for the development's 12 affordable housing units at the proposed site entrance and at the termini of the 2 branches of the proposed estate road. And then this slide breaks down the proposed unit size mix of the affordable housing. The tenure split shown here is considered acceptable. The unit size mix of the 7 affordable rent units is compliant with the expectations of the Council's Affordable Housing and Housing Mix SPD. The intermediate element is not compliant, as highlighted in red here. However, the Council's Strategic Housing team previously advised that this mix can be accepted at this site. Members will be aware, just moving on to site investigation, members will be aware that much of the discussion at last year's committee meeting and much of the concern raised by residents regarding the 3 applications related to ground conditions, removal of coal and material from the site and how the site would be remediated. I'll provide members with some reminders of the challenges at this site, as well as information about the site investigation that has been carried out here to establish what exists beneath the site in terms of coal and voids where coal has previously been mined. Most of the site is within the development high risk area as defined by the Coal Authority, now the Mining Remediation Authority. It is known to have historic mine workings beneath its surface, including those 3 mine entries denoted by red crosses in the plan shown earlier. Under the application refused in 2023, the then applicant proposed extensive extraction of coal from the site, which was described as being tantamount to open cast mining. However, under the last application and the current application, different proposals have been set out in relation to remediating the site and making it stable. The committee report provides more detail of the proposals, but in summary, the applicant now proposes grouting to fill the voids beneath the site, capping of the site's 3 mine entries and excavation of part of the site. And I'll define grouting. Grouting involves pumping or injecting a liquid grout, which is similar in some ways to concrete, which is made of pulverized fuel, ash, cement, sand and water, and that gets pumped into these voids. The grout is then allowed to set and harden, and as a result the land is then sufficiently stabilised to support the development proposed above. This plan shows the extent of the site investigation carried out at the site. Each of these acronyms that you see in the legend on the right hand side there refer to a different type of hole. For example, TPs, which are blue dots, are trial pits, and ROs, which are yellow dots, are rotary open hole boreholes. In each of these annotated locations, a hole was dug or sunk, and the findings were then set out in diagrams like these. This is just a sample of the findings at 3 of the holes that were dug or sunk, just to provide members with examples of what was found. I can't show them all here because there are pages and pages of these diagrams. So for example, trial pit 10 is illustrated on the left. That was dug to a depth of 1.3 metres, and the site investigator found 30 centimetres of topsoil, beneath which there was a sandstone in the form of gravel and cobbles. Trial pit 13 is shown here as well in the bottom left of this slide. And members can see here that beneath 45 centimetres of topsoil, intact coal was found. This does need to be noted, members, as combustible coal so close to the surface of a development site is a problem. It's a safety concern, and it will need dealing with before that site is developed. Coal that close to the surface poses a fire risk. The solution in that part of the site would be to either dig out that coal or provide 1 metre in depth of inert, i.e. non-combustible material above it to address that risk. And that approach needs to be applied to trenches for services as well. On the right hand side are the applicant's findings in the upper part of borehole 7. Boreholes are sunk to deeper depths than trial pits usually, and of interest here, beneath 20 centimetres of topsoil and approximately 8 metres of sandstone and mudstone, a void was found. This is likely to be a historic coal mining excavation, and it is these voids that beneath the site that would need to be grouted, i.e. filled, to stabilise the land so that development on the surface can then be implemented. Obviously, these site investigation holes don't cover every inch of the site. They never do in these site investigations. To know exactly where all the voids and all the remaining coal and other materials are beneath the site, an applicant would have to fully excavate it, which would be a disproportionate effort. The level of site investigation carried out by this applicant, as illustrated here, is normal and proportionate and is considered adequate for the purposes of informing the council's decision on this application. But because the site investigation holes don't and can't cover every inch of the site, some assumptions have to be made as to what exists between the various points where site investigation has probed the ground. So, informed by the site investigation findings, these sections on the right hand side of this slide have been drawn up, and you can see where the section lines were taken as shown in the plan on the left hand side of this slide. These, bear with me, pardon. So these sections have been drawn up, which which refer to the gathered information, but which also fill in the gaps between the points of investigation with reasonable assumptions as to where the coal seams and voids exist and extend beneath the site. Again, this is the normal approach for sites like this. 4 sections have been submitted, 2 of them are shown here, in which members can see dotted red lines denoting where the applicant has reasonably assumed coal and voids exist or extend between the site investigation points. It is this site investigation and mapping that has informed the applicant's figures regarding how much material would need to be removed from the site and how much material in the form of grout would need to be brought to the site. These slides and commentary also explain why the applicant can't reasonably be expected to put an absolutely precise figure on either amount. There is always a degree of assumption involved in calculating what needs to be done at a site like this, where there is coal and coal mining legacy beneath the surface, and officers are satisfied that the applicant has provided informed best estimates in response to this committee's queries and previous reasons for deferral. Informed by that site investigation, this plan shows the excavation proposed at the centre of the site, which is necessary to remove coal that is too close to the surface and to create developable platforms. Members should note that this plan doesn't include the excavation that would be needed to accommodate the proposed on-site attenuation tank. And then this plan, this is the applicant's proposed grouting plan. It doesn't show the latest layout of the development shown at the surface. However, it does usefully illustrate the applicant's proposed approach to grouting, where grout will be injected via drilled holes spaced 3 metres apart. That's the red dots and the orange triangles on this plan, where new dwellings are proposed. And then also they would grout via holes spaced 6 metres apart where roads are proposed. The drilled holes will be approximately 6 inches in diameter, and tracked rotary rigs, similar in size to some 360 excavators, will be used for this grouting, and there would be up to 3 of these rigs on site at any one time. There's an example in illustration of such a rig on the right hand side of this slide here. And then this slide shows the level changes proposed across this site. This is a site section taken along the site's north to south downhill slope. So in response to this committee's first reasons for refusal for the application before last, the amount of material, which I'm calling material because it may be a mix of coal, soil, sandstone, clay and shale, that may need to be removed from this site has been put at 4,400 cubic metres by the applicant. The applicant has stated, however, that this figure is likely to change as works progress and as more information becomes available. This amount is not considered unusual for a development of this size and nature at a sloped site where there are existing voids and seams near to the proposed surface level. Achieving appropriate road gradients also usually necessitates excavation and changes to levels at such sites. The amount of grout to be brought to the site has been put at 1,650 tonnes by the applicant. Again, this figure is likely to change as works progress and as more information becomes available, and a more refined estimate may be calculated following additional borehole investigations. The applicant has also provided figures for the number of HGV movements that will be necessary in relation to the proposed excavation and grouting. These are 550 HGV loads of material being removed from the site, so 550 movements out, and 550 movements in and 550 movements out, and then also 83 HGV movements in and 83 HGV movements out, bringing grout material to the site. A construction route plan has been submitted by the applicant showing HGVs moving to and from the nearest high order or A road, which is Wakefield Road, the A636 to the south, rather than northwards via Lower Cumberworth. Removal of material from the site would take 8 weeks, and grouting would take at least 2 months. Residents' concerns regarding the potential impacts of these works are, as per the previous application, are valid, and appropriate conditions intended to protect the amenities of residents during those phases are recommended. Full wording of those conditions is provided in the committee report. These are the same as those set out in last year's committee report, albeit with some amendments in relation to the highway conditions. And as noted above, appropriate HGV routing has been proposed by the applicant. Regarding other considerations relevant to this application, drainage and flood risk have been raised as key concerns in many of the representations received from local residents. However, the lead local flood authority, who are aware of the applicant's grouting proposals, have advised that the proposals are now acceptable as downstream improvements to the relevant watercourse have been carried out and acceptable on-site attenuation and an acceptable discharge rate have been proposed. Environmental health officers now consider the proposals acceptable in relation to site contamination, mine gas, which readings have confirmed is currently negligible, and with regard to noise, dust and other environmental impacts subject to conditions. The site's TPO protected oak tree will be retained and worked around. Biodiversity net gain will be secured. As mentioned earlier, for this application, a 10% BNG is now a mandatory requirement. No financial viability information was submitted under this application. 158 representations, as mentioned earlier, all of which were objections to the application, have been received in relation to this application. These include representations from Councillor Hannah McKercher, Councillor Tim Bamford and the Upper Dearne Valley Environmental Trust, and Denbighdale Parish Council have also raised objections. Significant amendments were made following the 2023 refusal of planning permission and during the life of the last application to ensure relevant planning concerns have been addressed. The proposed development relates to a site allocated for housing and will contribute to housing delivery in the borough, which is a key consideration, not least given the tilted planning balance now applicable in light of the borough's current housing supply situation. Approval of full planning permission is recommended, subject to conditions and the completion of a Section 106 agreement. Thank you, Chair.
to, I'm going to go to the members of the public. Is it?
Can you put your mic on?
I was just seeking a wee bit of clarification, 30 seconds. The officer mentions in the talk about tile pit 13, it mentions a figure of 1 metre in a cover. Is that an extra metre or a total of 1 metre cover? That's all I need to know.
Through you, Chair, to deal with coal that's close to the surface, yes, the applicant would either need to add a whole extra metre of material, inert material on top of that coal, or would have to excavate the coal out and either reach inert material beneath the coal, or if they carry on reaching more and more coal, the deeper the dig, they will still have to add another 1 metre of material on top of that coal.
Okay, so we'll move to our speakers for this item. As I think Sheila's already mentioned to everybody, you have 3 minutes to speak, and there's a clock there showing you how much time you have left to speak. So when I just call your name, if you just introduce yourself and turn on your microphone, and you can speak. So the first person we have is James. So Jane, we'll come to you first.
Okay, well, I'm speaking on behalf of the residents who live on the perimeter of the Cliff Hill site. I'm just going to name some. There's 273, 275, 277A, 278 Cumberth Road, Springhead Gardens, Leek Hall Crescent, Crook Cottage, and the Chapel Court. Our major concern is the coal extraction, the removal and the practicalities of taking this away from site. Even though figures have been given, we're not convinced that they understand the depths of the waste that needs to be removed, or coal. It was estimated at the last planning meeting that this would take 4 months via HGV vehicles, and it's clear to the unbiased that this area and the road system doesn't have capacity to handle this quantity, and it's unstable on every level, unsustainable on every level, in our opinion. Many parents and children use this area to cross onto the footpath, which is the access to Gilthwaite's Junior School, dog walkers, hikers to the Withy Wood areas. Just the other day we saw a school field trip from the Gilthwaite's Junior School coming with approximately 60 children, 2 chaperone teachers, taking them down the footpath and across this area of road, which taking them into the village to do some field work. The obvious thing is we want to encourage children and people to walk and use the footpath and the road area. As a perimeter dweller, along with our neighbours, I can express that we're terrified about the outcome of this application. We're concerned about harmful airborne particles, noise pollution, and subsequent subsidence risks. My husband works from home 4 days a week and is less than 10 metres from the coal extraction site. My son works as a paramedic, often relying on day sleep. How can we expect to live a normal life with so close to this work, this excavation work? I'm sure that there's other people in the village that rely on day sleep, often working machinery and driving for a living. So having looked through the planning application, we're concerned about inconsistencies and the lack of thorough risk assessments. We're just not confident in the application.
Thank you, Jane.
Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker is Emma Dimbulo. Yep.
Chair, councillors, good afternoon. I'm a resident of Springhead Gardens, which borders the site to the south. The principle that there must be consistency in planning decisions is well established. This application has been refused by 2 previous committees, and there is no fundamental change in the application to the previous submissions, and it should be refused again. It's also opposed by Jade Bottrell, MP for Denbigh, who has written to me to confirm she's lodged a formal objection with the Planning Inspectorate and is currently liaising with them on further action. Putting this application before the committee, before the appeal of the exact same refused application has been determined, seeks to bypass due process. Is the rush because the government has committed to passing legislation to stop issuing coal mining permits, which would kill off this application? On the appeal, Mr Grayson gave a written representation that the Council will defend the previous committee's decision and yet is recommending that exact same application to be approved by this committee. At the very least, the Council finds itself in a conflict of interests. Mr Grayson's report refutes credible objections on the basis that they were not cited by the previous committee as reasons for refusal. But at the last hearing, the committee was misdirected when told that they could only consider grounds for refusal based on the deferred issue, i.e. the coal mining. In fact, the application had gone back before the committee as a full application. That statement was misleading and denied the committee of the opportunity to consider other grounds for refusal and would make an approval today at risk of judicial review. For example, Mr Grayson's report accepts that certain plots do not achieve the required separation distance of 21 metres with the existing properties. In the House Builders Design Guide, this is the minimum distance required for 2-storey houses, but longer distances may be necessary if the site includes higher buildings or the steep topography of the site presents particular challenges relating to overlooking, which is clearly the case here. These are 3-storey houses which stand at a much higher topographical level than existing properties and will be overbearing to an unreasonable level, causing significant loss of privacy and amenity to existing residents. It's also well documented that when approving the local plan, the planning inspector insisted that vehicle access must be via Leek Hall Lane due to safety issues with Cumberworth Lane, and the plan states the provision of a pedestrian footway is required across the site frontage at Leek Hall Lane. This application with site access at Cumberworth Lane therefore does not meet the local plan. Allocation to the local plan didn't guarantee suitability of any site, and in this case more detailed investigations have shown the site to be unsuitable for development. Despite the woeful lack of detail, the application still says that coal extraction will be required, and the last 2 applications were refused on that basis. Crucially, the application doesn't include an environmental impact analysis or any risk assessments on the potential damage caused to the structure of existing homes standing a few metres away. I urge you to refuse the application.
Thank you, Emma. Next, we've got Nicola Tiffany.
Thank you. I'm here today to object to this application on the grounds of both planning policy and environmental responsibility. The applicant justifies resubmitting an identical version of a previously refused application by citing a recent update to the MPPF, placing greater emphasis on accelerating housing delivery. Let's be clear, though, that this does not grant local authorities carte blanche to prioritise acceleration over sound planning principles, and this application still fails to meet planning requirements, including Kirklees local plan policies LP36, LP52, LP53 and chapters 8, 15 and 17 of the MPPF. Whichever way the applicant wants to dress this up, we are still talking about coal extraction. Paragraphs 224 and 228 of the MPPF require appropriate and effective mitigation where mineral resources are affected, yet this application still lacks detail. Site tests have shown carbon dioxide levels exceeding the 5% trigger threshold, and while the environmental health team suggests this can be mitigated through monitoring, no clear monitoring regime or emergency remediation process has been set out in the application. And at this rate, there will be so many conditions placed on this application, it will be impossible to establish whether the developer is compliant. Paragraph 230 of the NPPF states that the planning permission for coal extraction should only be granted if environmentally acceptable or national, local or community benefits clearly outweigh the harm. The applicant argues that the delivery of housing is the clear benefit, but this is misleading. There are other less contentious sites that can contribute to housing targets without introducing this scale of environmental harm. The impact of this scheme will affect residents daily, especially during the extraction and remediation phases, and local concern is reflected in the 158 objections submitted. Community benefits should be viewed holistically and not through the narrow lens of housing numbers alone. Beyond planning policy misalignment, it is 2025 and we are sat here talking about coal extraction, especially given central government have announced that they're legislating a ban on new coal mining licences, which mean this wouldn't be able to go ahead in the foreseeable future anyway. Kirklees Council declared a climate emergency in 2019, but to be honest, they may as well not have bothered if these are the sorts of developments that follow, where the carbon cost of extraction and transporting thousands of tonnes of material completely undermines any claim to improving and protecting the environment. The fact that Kirklees Council is behind on its house building targets is not the fault of this community, but we will pay the price. I respectfully urge the committee to uphold the previous refusal and protect this community from a scheme that falls far short of what responsible, sustainable development looks like in 2025. Thank you.
Yep, thanks, Nicola. So next we've got Sarah Turnbull.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm a resident of Leek Hall Road and I'd like to talk about site access and road matters and begin with reminding the councillors that this plot of land was only to be considered as part of the local plan if the access was from Leek Hall Lane. The planning inspector made this very clear and yet this condition is repeatedly ignored. Cumberworth Lane is a bus route and a designated route for HGV lorries to a local transport business. The planning report states that near the proposed access, Cumberworth Lane is 5.5 metres wide and therefore sufficient to allow a HGV and a light vehicle to pass. What it doesn't say is that there is insufficient room to allow 2 HGVs or buses to pass. In fact, the report fails to consider all options of passing vehicles, including articulated vehicle combinations. Why? According to the Department for Transport's Manual for Streets, the average width of a bus or HGV is 3 metres. And therefore the minimum width of a designated bus route should be 6 metres. Nottingham County Council guidelines are for 6.2 metres for bus routes, York and Birmingham City Council 6.5 metres. Why is 5.5 metres sufficient in Kirklees? For a light vehicle to pass a bus or HGV close to the proposed site entrance, they have to drive close to the curb where the existing pavement is only 0.9 metres. I can tell you from personal experience that wing mirrors of vehicles regularly overhang the pavement here. It is dangerous for pedestrians. And although much has been made of the proposed pavement on the opposite side of the road, the existing pavement and the road itself cannot be widened and made safer. The report also states that there is sufficient space for RCVs to turn into the development. But again, it's a fail to go further and consider the extra turning room needed for heavy plant and construction traffic, of which there will be a lot. And what happens when this is met by other larger vehicles using the road? And briefly, other points where data used seems inadequate. The safety audit for the access only included 2 half-hour visits at off-peak times in 2022. And has failed to consider the impact of increased traffic from other developments. Thank you. Oh, did it? Okay. I thought so. The safety audit included 2 half-hour visits at off-peak times and has failed to consider the impact of increased traffic from other local developments that have been recently approved. And in the traffic assessment, the data used to determine the method of travel to work, this was taken from the 2011 census. Why not the 2021 census that is more up to date? Does this mean that the car trip rate predictions are outdated and therefore inaccurate too? Inconsistencies which undermine the credibility of the reports used. The proposed access point contravenes paragraph 115B of the MPPF. Safe and suitable access to the site cannot be ensured on Cumberworth Lane, and I urge you to therefore reject this application again.
Thank you. Sorry about that. We're having a few issues with the timer. Hopefully it'll work next time, but if not, I'll let you know. So next we've got Liz Kerwin.
Hi, thank you. I'm a resident of Leek Hall Crescent and I'm speaking today to raise a strong objection to the planning application on the grounds of both the legal obligation to undertake risk assessments and the impacts on health of residents in the locality. So the applicant has not clearly provided an adequate risk assessment for the impact associated with the development. All hazards or the controls for monitoring these are not clearly identified. For example, the impact on health to the public or employees, the impact on the environment, such as noise, vibration and runoff waters from stored coal during inclement weather conditions. They haven't fully applied the test of so far as is reasonably practicable, which is weighing the level of risk against the cost, time, effort and inconvenience of mitigating it. In this case, the known and documented serious health impacts demand comprehensive mitigation. Anything less is a breach of statutory duty. Whilst there is a form of expert knowledge in terms of a peer review, the public knowledge test has not been applied. Cases such as the Fossifran mine in Wales and Druridge Bay in Northumberland have highlighted significant public opposition, health-based objections and legal scrutiny of surface mining close to communities. It's also of note that this development has had no public consultation since its first application in 2022. There are many documented effects of open cast mining which would unnecessarily expose the public, including respiratory illnesses such as silicosis, COPD, asthma and lung cancer through the release of crystalline silica dust, which is a group 1 carcinogen, cardiovascular disease due to exposure from PM2.5 and PM10 particles, the vulnerability of children to air pollution. There's well-documented evidence of impaired lung development and increased asthma in areas near surface mining sites. Denbydale First and Nursery School is located less than half a mile from the proposed works. Public health studies have noted residents living near surface mining sites reported increased symptoms of anxiety, depression and sleep disturbances associated with proximity to open cast mining. To proceed with this in or near a public area without a comprehensive documented risk assessment is a clear breach of both Regulation 3 of the Management of Health and Safety at Work Regulations 1999 and Sections 2 and 3 of the Health and Safety at Work Extract Act 1974. There is no clear plan for controlling the distribution of extracted coal, and reassurances provided so far around not selling or further distributing the extracted coal are more like hopeful promises and future guesstimations rather than firm commitments, and they clearly don't align with the National Plan for Net Zero Emissions. Whilst the recommendation and condition of the submission and approval of a construction environmental management plan is noted, this will not address any of the impacts on health and well-being. There are considerable doubts about the application's genuine desire to make good their assurances due to the lack of detailed information and credibility in their submission. Thank you, and they refuse the application.
Thank you. And now we've got Neil Denby.
I'm Dr Neil Denby, I'm a parish councillor. This proposal is for a noisy, traffic-heavy industrial site involving open cast mining in the heart of a rural village. It will scar the village for years, block a major access road to the village centre and result in unacceptable levels of noise pollution, traffic pollution, air pollution and loss of amenity, both visual and natural. My major concern is the extraction of a substantial tonnage of coal from the thick Winmore seam that runs beneath the site. The history of applications makes it clear that the primary reason for development is to extract the coal. In 2022, it was proposed to mine the entire site for 12,000 tonnes of coal, involving excavations to 10 metres deep and an on-site coal processing plant. The mound that the officer mentioned is the spoil from some of those activities. The latest application removes the explicit intention to remediate by mining, replacing it with excavation may be necessary at the centre of the site. Amounts of excavation and vehicle movements are all likely to be underestimates, as they're based on weak assumptions of both the thickness of seam and how much of it has been worked, with approximations which are likely to change. Nevertheless, over 4,500 cubic metres of coal is still proposed to mine, contrary to Kirklees Local Plan LP33, as well as paragraph 183 of the National Planning Policy Framework. There is no evidence or assessment of where the coal will be disposed of once it has been mined. If it is to be sold, the income has not been anywhere declared. If it is combusted, this is contrary to Kirklees' environmental policies and current priorities, contravening LP11, LP20, LP28, LP30, LP49 and LP 63 of the Kirklees local plan. If the job of disposing of the coal is given to a third party not yet mentioned, how is the disposal, sale or storage of the coal to be monitored? The peer review, paid for by the applicant, cites the small 6-house development at Springhead Gardens in the corner of HS 144 as a precedent, claiming the project proceeded without unacceptable environmental or health risk or damage. This is not a sufficiently similar site. The geology of the two sites is not similar, as only the thin Cumberworth seam skirts the edge of this site. Anybody living anywhere near it at the time that it was done knows that it was not done without controversy. I contend that this site is not sustainable, primarily due to the necessity of removing large quantities of coal. No overriding community benefits have been identified which would make the extraction of coal acceptable. The proposal remains contrary to mineral planning policy in Kirklees as well as national planning policy. I urge you to reject it.
Thank you. Okay, now comes councillors. Councillor Bamford, you're first. You have up to 5 minutes to speak.
Thank you, Chair. Could I just clarify something first, please? The first application was from Urban Group York Limited in the name of Nick Gould. This one was refused. And Urban Group since have stopped trading, I believe. They're going out of business. This is a resubmission, but in the name of PB Planning Limited, care of JGC and Nick Gould. Is this a resubmission? And was the first, so we are still owed for the first application, I believe. And does a resubmission attract a charge? Could we just answer that if we could, please?
If you want to make your comments, Councillor Bamford, I'll ask you to answer those questions when we get.
Okay, so and if it's not, I mean, if it's changed this application, does that then class it as a resubmission? If there are changed elements in it, and why are we recommending it for approval if we're going to defend the appeal? That's the first part. Right. There remains significant uncertainty regarding the volume of coal still present on this site. While the figure of 4,400 cubic metres has been mentioned, there is no clear evidence that this represents the full extent. The remaining quantity could be substantially greater, raising major concerns about land stability and public safety. It's quoted 550 truckloads. It could be 1,050, it could be 2,050, who knows? No one knows because they've not done a fully intrusive site survey. Additionally, the applicant's description of the coal as inert is factually incorrect. Coal is not inert, it is a combustible material capable of oxidising, leaching contaminants, or even igniting under certain circumstances. To misclassify it as inert calls into question the accuracy and reliability of the environmental statements provided and the developer's overall approach to risk. And when you dig coal out as well, it would be, economically, you dig it out clean. You don't mix it with spoil, because once you mix it with spoil, the spoil then becomes contaminated. So there's no way, I don't know what alchemy they're going to do to make this, when they describe it as inert. It's not inert, it never will be inert. Nothing containing coal will ever be inert. So if you mix it with spoil, you've got more contaminated material to take from site. The Wood Nook and Springfield Gardens aren't comparable to this site either, because no coal was extracted from those sites. The applicants entered into a unilateral undertaking not to dispose of coal commercially. However, how are we going to enforce this upon a change of ownership? It's public knowledge that the land was marketed for sale prior to the previous committee meeting, indicating the applicant's intention to sell post-permission. Therefore, I think that an agreement has no binding long-term effect. Once planning permission is granted, there's a real risk that the coal be extracted commercially either by the current owner or any future buyer, which could have devastating consequences for the local environment, residents and infrastructure. The proposed access onto Cumberworth Lane is wholly unacceptable. It enters just above a pinch point where it's impossible for two HGVs to pass safely. This section of road is on a steep gradient regularly used by 40-ton HGVs from the depot on Coal Pit Lane. The combination of restricted width, heavy vehicle movements and gradient presents a serious safety hazard for both road users and pedestrians. This issue was explicitly raised by the planning inspector during the local plan hearings, where it was advised that access should be taken from Leek Hall Lane. Ignoring this recommendation contradicts established planning guidance and fails to mitigate the significant risks associated with the current proposal. And it's all right saying that it's safe to come out there, but once you put a junction into another road, it's less safe straight away. So I don't believe that. Contrary to the National Planning Policy Framework, while the Council may face pressure due to housing supply metrics, this does not override site-specific risks or national policy. The development is clearly unsustainable and conflicts with key principles of the 2025 National Planning Policy Framework, including paragraphs 196 to 197, which require due regard to ground conditions and land stability. The unresolved core legacy violates these safeguards. Paragraph 8c, which applies development to protect and enhance the natural environment. The risks of residual coal and potential extraction undermine this objective. Paragraph 11d, the presumption in favour of development does not apply where adverse impacts significantly outweigh the benefits. A test this site clearly fails. We've heard that the site was fully assessed by the council prior to local plan inclusion. It wasn't. It's a cursory look over just to make sure there are no glaringly obvious problems to it being included in the plan. So I say that this application presents unacceptable environmental and safety risk compounded by an applicant who has already demonstrated unreliable conduct. The proposal is contrary to national policy, rests on unreliable and unenforceable promises, and would set a dangerous precedent.
Thank you. Councillor Simpson, also 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Hello once again, colleagues. I'm speaking on behalf of myself and Councillor McKirker, who can't be here today due to work commitments, and I apologise for the fact I'll be speaking quite quickly to make sure I don't run out of time. As was the case with the first 3 applications, which were withdrawn, refused, my key objections are related to the significant coal attraction that's required to facilitate this becoming a potential housing site and the impact this would have on the environment and my residents. It's vital to remember that this is an application in the very centre of a large residential village, which by definition includes provisions for open cast mining in the centre of that village. Once again, the applicant has given no real consideration of the impact this will have, pretending that this is an acceptable thing to be conditioned that will be considered properly just after you as a committee have given them legal permission to do the mining and have absolutely no powers to then stop it. In relation to coal reserves, page 150 of the local plan strategies and policies document says under the heading coal, 1510, there are extensive economically viable coal reserves underlying the eastern side of Kirklees. It's likely, however, any future interest in the extraction will be in the form of surface extraction located near the Wakefield Leeds districts. National planning guidance does not support the opening of new open cast coal sites unless they meet strict criteria regarding environmental impact or overwhelming community benefits. I can assure you, colleagues, as a member of that community and someone concerned about the environment, that this application does not do that. I also want to quote the coal mining risk assessment commissioned by the applicant themselves for this application, part of which was included in the officer's presentation in this meeting. The applicant commissioned report states that organic content on site would be, quote, unsuitable for infilling the land after extraction. Quote, it's likely that significant volumes of unmined coal, and in this case fire clay, may be retrieved. It should be noted that such materials may have considerable value and provided careful handling takes place on site, consideration could be given to selling them as a commodity. This is, of course, contradicted in what's suggested in the unilateral understanding. So on the one hand, we're being told that the coal must be taken off the site and disposed of in some way. It can't be used in any way on the site. It has to go, and it's a fire risk, as Victor said, if we're going to make this a viable housing site. And then on the other hand, we're being told that we should just trust that minerals of considerable value will not be disposed, sold, or appropriated, and that they're going to be off-site. They won't be burned, quote, by the existing owner, which is perhaps a helpful caveat, and they're not going to be anywhere else either. That's not quite adding up for me, because they're not just going to vanish, and whatever's done with the coal afterwards, with or without commercial incentives, the impact of removing these millions of pounds worth of coal via an open cast mine in the centre of our village is going to have a considerable and detrimental impact on local people and the local environment. That is a consideration for this committee and is contrary to local plan policy as well as the National Planning Policy Framework. You've rejected this application multiple times already, and you were absolutely right to do so. I'm here today to ask you to stand by it. It hasn't changed, and nor should your decision. Often these committees would get a worried, well, what happens if it goes to appeal? Don't worry, colleagues, it's already there. don't allow a mockery to be made out of yourselves and this process, and don't let an open cast mine be opened in the centre of our village. I ask you to reject this application on the basis of the environmental objections that you've made in the previous 22-23 applications, namely, and I'm going to name them this time for your mark in case you want to write them down. It's contrary to our minerals policy set out in LP 36. The applicant does not satisfy policy LP 53 on contaminated land in failing to ensure that the contamination/instability does not have the potential to cause harm to people or the environment. That the impact of the coal extraction and mass transport and vehicle movements of it would be contrary to our policies on air quality under LP 51, where the applicant is required to demonstrate that they will not have an adverse impact, which this application has not even attempted to do, yet again, despite us raising it at every committee thus far, and that its environmental impact and significant risks run contrary to LP 25, where the application is required to consider in full and show that it will not reduce the quality of life and well-being to an unacceptable level or have an unacceptable impact on the environment. It couldn't be clearer, colleagues, that an open cast mine in the middle of our village will do that, and I ask you to reject it on that basis.
Thank you. And so the last person to speak we've got on behalf of the applicant, Paul Butler. Paul, yeah, you've got 3 minutes to speak.
Afternoon. Thank you for allowing me to speak. Your officers have again recommended this application for approval, and this is not something that they have done lightly, and is evidence of how robustly and seriously they have assessed it again. They're recommending approval again as there's absolutely no planning grounds to refuse it. The recommendation also considers some key changes made to the proposals. 1, the legal commitment of the applicant to not extract coal from the site for commercial purposes. 2, the legal commitment of the applicant to not burn any coal from the site. 3, the submission of an independent peer review confirming that the evidence submitted with the application and your officer's review and approval of it is correct. The peer review also confirms that the construction process will ensure that any material removed from the site will be inert and will pose no risk to the local residents of the environment. Evidence is therefore now being provided by 3 separate experts, engineers who prepared the original reports, your environmental health officer, and the independent engineers who undertook the peer review. These experts have vast experience of developments in Kirklees, and all of them have confirmed that the proposed development of the site is completely acceptable. As you'll be aware, the development of sites underlain by coal in Kirklees is common. Approximately 76% of the local plan's housing allocations, which have a capacity for nearly 15,000 homes, are underlain by coal in some form. This includes a part of the same housing allocation as the application site, now known as Springhead Gardens, which has been developed. The Springhead Gardens site shares similar ground conditions as the application site, and engineering information that was submitted alongside that scheme was prepared by the exact same engineers as this application site. This provides practical and physical evidence that your officer's recommendation for approval is entirely correct. The proposals will not have an unacceptable environmental impact, and the correct mitigation measures will be put in place throughout the construction process. These measures will be secured by condition, and you will note that the proposed conditions go much further than the council standard ones, providing everyone with firmer assurances that the correct safeguards will be put in place. The construction process mirrors a significant number of other housing sites that have been developed in Kirklees, include one located within the same housing allocation. The applicant's commitment to specific legal obligations, which stops the sale and burning of coal from this site, will also provide precise legal assurances to allay the concerns of residents. There are no stronger assurances that the applicant can provide. These assurances stay with the land in perpetuity and are enforceable by fine or conviction. The development before you today is not an open cast mining scheme. It is, simply put, the residential development of a housing allocation. Please support the recommendation for approval from your officers. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we've had all our speakers. I'll come to members in a minute. Victor, just a couple of points just to add. Can you answer the question that Councillor Bamford asked about the applicant resubmission? And also, that obviously, there were just a few comments that wouldn't mind clarification on the perspective of open cast mining. So does this come under the definition of that? What consideration has or hasn't been given to that? And some impact, I think there was quite a few comments around the health impacts potentially on the extraction do we have any comments on that and, you know, the compliance with our policy? So if you could just briefly just answer some of the comments that were made, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, Chair, thank you. Through you. This is a resubmission in that it is the same proposal as what was proposed under the previous application. It is a different applicant. This application has been submitted by or on behalf of the landowner rather than Urban Group, who were the developer who were previously interested in the site. But in terms of the actual proposals, yeah, we'd call this a resubmission. And a new application fee was paid with this new application. We haven't referred to the application or the proposals as an open cast mine. We've referred to it as a residential development that requires mitigation of the site before the dwellings are built. There's nothing I can see in the submissions, Chair and members, that have been made under this application that warrants it being characterised as an open cast mining proposal. And then in terms of health impacts, there's no policy requirement under the local plan for detailed risk assessments arising from or associated with the health impacts of this development and the preparation of the site and remediation of the site. There's no requirement in policy for those risk assessments to be submitted, and they were not.
Councillor Pinnock, you indicated you want to speak.
Thank you, Chair. There is one very important thing that this application has got, which the others didn't have, and that was this unilateral undertaking. The real difficulty with this site, as several people have pointed out, is that it's got coal under it. Now, as Mr. Butler has pointed out, there are plenty of sites all over Kirklees where that is true. What I don't understand is at what level this coal is in any of those sites. Now, we have some evidence that there may be, I'm not even sure that we know how deep the coal is on this site. So I'll come to things that I'm puzzled about in this application, and I'll go through them in not necessarily in that kind of order. When I was looking at this unilateral undertaking, what I didn't appreciate was that if there is coal at less than a metre depth, is that correct? Then it's got to be dug out. You can't just leave it. But I am puzzled because there are geological survey maps available which will show where various seams are. And it's one thing I've learnt since I came to live in this area, that coal mining areas have got extremely detailed geological survey maps. And so it should be possible for that information showing how deep the coal seams are to be given to interested parties. And for this purpose, the Planning Committee is an interested party. So that's something that's not there. There shouldn't be any doubt about it. We should know how deep the coal is, therefore how it's to be treated. Right, now look at the text of this unilateral undertaking. I am not happy with it because it says the owner covenants not to dispose, sell or appropriate any of the coal removed or extracted for commercial purposes, nor shall the owner burn any coal that has been removed or extracted. There's a big hole in that undertaking, and that is, it doesn't say that if anybody else started digging on the site to extract the coal for whatever reason, then that doesn't appear to be covered by that. So I I think it needs to be reworded. There is another issue which has been raised by previous speakers, and that is there any fire clay within removable reach? Now, seems to me fire clay is not a problem in terms of coal, in that it's not combustible. And it has a value. It might be thought that it was a good idea to get that out of the way, but that's just complicating the issue. For the purposes of this undertaking, or if it were to be a condition, I'm not sure how we do this, we need to ensure that the coal cannot be extracted. And yes, can I leave it at that point? I think there will be other issues that I want to come back on, but having read through the report, that one thing struck me as being unhelpful, actually, because it doesn't go far enough.
Yeah, okay. So just quickly then, Victor, just on those 2 points. So on the geographical surveys, I mean, obviously you went through quite a detail what they provided in terms of the geology and the boreholes and stuff. But I don't know if you can comment on what you said about the maps and things. And then I think potentially, my understanding is we can potentially add something more specific to the 106 agreement around the coal extraction. But I don't know if you can cover those 2 bits off.
Thank you, Chair. Through you. Yeah, my understanding, members, is that yes, there are geological maps of the whole of the UK, but they are not site-specific. They don't go into as much detail, Councillor Pinnock, as you were suggesting. That is why applicants like this and other applicants at other sites in Kirklees and up and down the country do this site investigation to ascertain exactly where the coal underlies their sites. And I did show in one of the slides earlier on some examples of the borehole and other hole excavations that have been carried out by the applicant, and you probably saw him. I can show the slide again if need be. Those do illustrate where coal was found and illustrate at what depths that coal was found. But as I made the point earlier on, between those points of investigation, assumptions have had to be made by the applicant as to what lies between, and that's where the uncertainty lies in terms of exactly how much coal exists on site, exactly where it is, and what voids exist beneath the site as well. The unilateral undertaking submitted by the applicant, as I said in the committee report, provides some reassurance that the owner would not sell or burn the coal that is dug up from this site. We've had some discussions amongst officers as to how strong and enforceable that unilateral undertaking would be, and our feeling is that the matter could be made stronger or more strongly secured if it was enshrined in a Section 106 agreement that would not just bind the current owner of the site but also future owners and successors and possibly other parties involved with developing this site, just to tighten up controls on what happens to any coal that is removed from the site. Excuse me, if that's what members would find more reassuring, then that could be included in the Section 106 heads of terms for inclusion in the final legal agreement, should you decide to recommend resolve to grant approval for this application.
Thank you. Councillor Armour?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I was actually going to pick up the point about coal myself, and I've listened to Victor's explanation, but I certainly share concerns about the possibility of a third party obtaining coal and then selling on for combustion, because the applicant stressed the word would not be for sale by the applicant. He stressed the word the applicant would not sell the coal. That doesn't mean that the applicant won't provide the coal to a third party who might then sell it. I've listened to Victor's explanation, and certainly I think we would have to make that condition as strong as we possibly could, that coal is not to be combusted. However it gets to the furnace, it is not to be combusted. I'm not sure how we can word it, but that's not my problem. But I do take the point, very much on board. Incidentally, the applicant also said that materials removed will be inert, but then tells us coal will be removed. Coal's not inert, as Councillor Bamford mentioned. So there's something there doesn't add up. I'm not at all happy about it. Councillor Simpson again makes the presence of coal a very, very important matter for this application. Moving on, paragraph 11.8 of the committee report tells us that the inspector, as part of the government inspector, as part of the local plan process, and it's quoted, does specify that access should be gained from, I've got to find it, gained from Leakhall Lane. That's mentioned, and then it's just totally ignored in the report, because access is not to be from Leakhall Lane now in this application. So that, to me, just nullifies any claim that the inspector has approved this as a housing site, because the inspector has not. The inspector approved it as a housing site with a particular form of access, place of access, point of access, that is now being ignored. So I don't agree that this is fully part of the local plan as a housing site, because somebody's decided to ignore the inspector. But the inspector is very clear, as quoted in the papers. And then moving on again, I am very, very concerned, as are local residents, about the number of HGV movements. These movements could affect quite a large area, including parts of my ward, the Sovereign Crossroads. HGVs on our roads, the generic roads around this part of the borough, is very difficult. A lot of the roads are narrow. We've heard this. It's accepted that some of them are narrow. A lot of these HGVs are very wide. It's a hilly area. Brakes do fail, I'm afraid, on laden wagons. I mean, personally, for very rough reckoning, I'm open to correction, but I've always thought of a cubic yard of sand, stone, coal as being roughly a ton in weight. So we're talking about thousands upon thousands of tons being removed from this site, if coal is dug out, extracted for whatever reason. We're also talking about many thousands of tons of inert materials being brought onto the site. There are a large, large number of HGV movements. I don't trust the figures that were given. I really don't trust them. And then we've got noise disturbance. Yes, it's true, construction is noisy. I've worked night shifts myself quite a lot, and it doesn't help. I know it doesn't help, but it's a relatively short period of time. It needs to be kept to a minimum, certainly. And an interesting point by a member of the public was that we have to demonstrate consistency in planning decisions, and the consistent approach here would be refusal. That's the way I'm thinking at the moment. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of points that I think are worth mentioning. First of all, reference to the application, and one of the reasons why we officers are backing the application was about our building commitment as far as a council. I don't think that there's any way, shape or form that we should be influenced in any way, or even it should be a consideration just because we're behind on our numbers. So that was one point I wanted to make. The other was that it was mentioned by the officer, which was that it's the same proposal, different application, There has been some verbal commentary reference to the different application, but fundamentally it's exactly the same. So therefore I feel that the decision should be exactly the same. What I did want to delve into was that the feeling is that the work to be done, i.e. the extraction of coal and the putting in of grout, would make the site acceptable to build, which not only smacks of desperation, because as far as the building plot, I think it makes a really good field, is that we've also got to look at that if this was another type of structure, let's say a bridge, would we accept the build of a bridge? Maybe that it wasn't perfect, but it was acceptable. So because in this case it's people in houses, are we willing to accept some risk? I don't really understand what the implications of that are, building on coal that's just under the surface or extracting it. But it does seem that all the way through the conversations and the statements, it's all about accepting some risk and mitigating risk and placing grout in, and hopefully it'll be enough, extracting some metric tons of coal, but maybe it might be more. So that there's a lot of ifs and buts and maybes, which does to me smack of desperation as far as the developer and unfortunately for our council. And finally, I just wanted to say that it seems that the council hell-bent on climate change policies, unless in circumstances like this, it's that it better suits planning applications. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Thompson. Victor, is there anything else you wanted to come back on those comments? I mean, I think on the point of access, I mean, the access is referenced in that paragraph, but I don't think it's this is the only access point, is it? But that would be my interpretation, but I don't know if there's anything you want to say on that.
Yeah, through you, Chair. I think we had this point last time it came. The local plan does refer to that. That's not, it must be from there. If they can find, if a developer decides they can find another suitable access point, we will consider that on that basis. So he didn't put Leak Hall Lane forward as an access point. He didn't have a frontage onto that. He put an alternative through, and that's been assessed on that basis.
Okay, thank you. Did any other members have any comments? Councillor Sokol.
Thank you, Chair. Last time we refused this application, yeah, not unanimously but on divided votes. We refused this application mainly on the removal of a large amount of coal and transport the coal with unacceptable movement of the vehicle. Now, looking in this new application, I know that it's not the same applicant now, it's the new applicant. If I'm right, it says, hey, application has also stated that the material removal from the site is likely to be inert and would not be sellable like coal or burnable in any case. We are here with a different situation now. I think we should not refuse this applicant just only on this issue, one issue. We need to look other benefit as well of this application. We need houses. Government is making statement every day. We need houses, 62 houses there. We need to see the benefit of those houses in the local community and the Dunbydale village, which is shopping area. There will be economy growth as well. People who need the house, they will be able to buy their houses. Yeah. And other thing as well, the already the previous application has appealed to the Secretary of State against us, but this application, even if we refuse this, they will take some undertaking on from the application from this one, and we might lose the appeal on there. It will cost a lot of money to the council, and if we fail to defend it, yeah. Now on this one, I know there is some debate going on where you can, third party or second party, they can remove the coal, sell the coal, burn the coal. But as Council and Pinnick have said, we need to put some condition, Section 106 agreement, something like. Whoever in future they take the development, they can't do any remove any coal or sell the coals. I think we need to balance the benefit of the housing development and the other side, the refusal of this one. So I'm in favor to. I'm thinking, being a member of the planning committee for many years, I know last committee I've been abstained. I think my conscience will be wrong if I say no, refuse this application, no, which is not right. I'm moving officer recommendation to approve the application. Thank you, Chair.
Because just to be clear, Councillor Locker, you're moving the officer's recommendation, but I think you're supporting that we look to add some form of condition or agreement around that it strengthens that unilateral undertaking to make it more legally tight. Okay. Yeah. Councillor Pinnock, you want to?
Thank you, Chair. I'm still in two minds about this, to be perfectly honest. I know I have made quite a lot of the unilateral undertaking because, as I say, that is the one thing that distinguishes this from the previous applications. But as it's written at the moment, it's not good enough. Without suggesting which way I am going to end up dealing with this, I think we ought to defer this so that we get the proper wording for that, because it's just not adequate at the moment. It doesn't reassure anybody. Well, it certainly doesn't reassure me, because it doesn't do what it's purporting to do. And I think that we would need to see a form of words before the committee, before we take a decision on it. I don't think in a case like this it would be a good idea to approve it subject to the officers working out what the wording is. That's not very satisfactory, because I think it needs to be done in a public forum. Whilst I know that's a bit awkward in terms of ensuring that housing applications are dealt with expeditiously, there's enough doubt in relation to this one to say that we ought to be very careful over it. And just because a site is designated for housing, it doesn't mean to say that we just roll over and say, oh, that's all right then. We have got to look at it very carefully and work out whether it does what it's supposed to do. And in my opinion, this is not doing what it's supposed to do. So I will move deferral in order to get the wording of that condition, whatever, correct.
Yeah, go on. Okay, yeah.
Can I ask the officer, is it possible to change the wording on that which Councillor Pinnick had.
I think it's possible. I think what Councillor Pinnock's saying is he wants to see what the wording is before he agrees to it. Matthias, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. I've listened really attentively to one of our residents, members speaking on behalf of them, and then the committee. I absolutely understand the concern about the construction phase. In particular, there are other concerns, but I absolutely understand that. This application has gone further than I've ever experienced in my career, looking at the methodology and the issues around the construction. I don't think there's more technical information that could be produced on that matter. That's my professional view. I share the committee position that, and listening to our residents, that a Section 106 to ensure that the coal, if it's removed from site, is kept, is not burnt, is not sold, and whomever owns it has that obligation on them in perpetuity. That's not unreasonable. The applicant will absolutely do that. Officers can draft that up. Officers can do it as a delegation if you want, or if you decide to defer it, you can have it back at a later date. I think the issue here is that we've probably gone as far as we could ever go before you actually take up the surface of the site and know what's there. The analysis is as comprehensive as I've ever experienced. So I think with an amendment, if that's what the committee want to do, the Section 106 route will bind and tie down this what-if scenario, and it's up to members thereafter. I hope that's helpful, Chair. If there's anything more, please let me know.
Okay. Go on then, Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. With everything that's been said and the application being a little different than what it was before, I move that for refusal.
Councillor Armour?
I'll second refusal.
Okay. So I mean, we've had a few different options, but we've had a move and a seconder for refusal, so I think we'll have to do that, take that first, okay? And I presume we're comfortable that's on the grounds of the same reasoning as the previous refusal. Yeah.
So that's exactly this.
Sorry. Is that?
So that's on the basis of the exact same wording as the previous refusal you're moving. Councillor Armour's seconded, so we'll take a vote on that, Chair.
Yeah.
Councillor Sokol? This is for, you're voting for or against refusal of the application on the same basis as the previous one?
Against.
Against, thank you. Councillor Lee Richards?
Support refusal.
So that's 4?
Yep.
Yeah. Councillor Pinnock?
Sorry, Chair, on the basis that we haven't discussed the question of whether, how we get round the unilateral thing, against.
Against. Councillor Thompson?
For.
Councillor Armour?
For.
Councillor Homewood?
I'm against.
So that is 3 votes for, 3 against. Chair, you have a casting vote?
Against.
Against. That falls.
Okay. That's fallen. We've had a mover for approval with the agreement of the addition and for deferral. Councillor Richard, yep.
Can I second deferral?
So you're voting on deferral, that, if I'm correct, is on the basis that the Head of Planning and Development and the Head of Legal will come back with wording, revised wording for a Section 106 to do with the extraction of coal from the site. Councillor Sokol?
For.
Councillor Lee Richards?
For.
Councillor Pinnock?
For.
Councillor Thompson?
For.
Councillor Armour?
For.
Councillor Homewood?
For, yeah.
That's carried unanimous, Chair, so it'll be deferred.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for the long meeting, everybody.
Chair, can I just add one point just for residents' benefit?
Yep.
We will aim to bring the section 106 back as quickly as practical. That may be, the next committee is 6 weeks from now, give or take. We'll do our very best to do it then. If it isn't, it'll be the following committee. Should the appeal, which is live with the planning inspectorate, progress, we'll do our very best to defend that as it goes through, if that does get determined before, but we'll do our best to try and get the 106 back to you as quick as possible. I can't say fairer than that. Hopefully that gives comfort. Thank you.
Yeah, understood. Okay, we're going to take a quick break now for people to leave. Hello, welcome back after that short break. Okay, so we'll move on to the item 11. I'll hand over to Katie.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm Katie Chew, case officer of this application for erection of 30 dwellings at Land off Barnsley Road in Denby Dale. Oh, it's not clicking. This is the application site here, as I said, located off Barnsley Road. The site itself is irregular in shape and slopes slightly downhill from south to north given the topography of the area. The site has an area of circa 2.35 hectares, and as you can see, the majority of the site is allocated for housing within the Kirklees local plan, HS136, and that is shown by the orange overlay. Whilst this allocation recommends a density of 72 dwellings, during the course of the previously withdrawn application in 2021, the adjacent woodland located to the east of the site, known as Tanner Wood, was designated as ancient woodland by Natural England. It was therefore requested, in line with Natural England standard advice, that a 15-metre buffer should be provided from the boundary of the woodland to the proposed development. This has therefore resulted in a significant loss of the developable area of the housing allocation. This will be discussed in more detail later into the presentation. So looking at the site location, residential dwellings are located to the north and south of the site, and to the west, development is also underway for the erection of 34 dwellings, which were approved under application 2019-91836, and they form part of housing allocation HS141. Between the application site and HS141 runs public right-of-way Den/66/40. Protected trees can also be found on the western boundary of the site and include 2 ash trees. Here are some photos looking from Barnsley Road into the site. You can see Tanner Wood on the east there, and there's also the differing land levels of the site which slope downhill from south to north towards residential dwellings on Inkerman Way and Broomhouse Close. This slide just shows some photographs looking to the east and west of the site from Barnsley Road towards adjacent neighbouring properties. This is the proposed site plan, and as you can see, there is to be one access off of Barnsley Road. This will provide access to the proposed 30 dwellings, and to create suitable visibility, a portion of third-party land has been included within the red line boundary of the site. So this is just this little dog leg in the corner here. This part, property notice has been served on the landowner, and this portion of land is located within the green belt. An assessment has been made against paragraph 154H of the MPPF, which relates to engineering operations, and is concluded that given the small scale and nature of the proposed works, the works would neither harm the openness of the green belt or contradict the purpose of including land within it. The site layout has somewhat been dictated by the contours of the land, and more specifically the adjacent ancient woodland. The plan clearly shows the 15-metre buffer zone that was requested around Tanner Wood and this sort of green hatched area along here. But for the most part, they are providing 20-metre separation distances. The space is to be left open and be utilised as public open space, and in addition to this, 347 square metres is also proposed on the western boundary of the site here. The application is supported by a landscape management plan, of which soft landscaping is shown within the areas of the public open space and throughout the estate. On site there is a pumping station, there's an attenuation tank and also a substation. So the pumping station, attenuation tank are up here, substation down here. In terms of drainage, this is outlined in full within the drainage flood risk section of the committee report, but ultimately the disposal of surface water from the site is to be discharged Halliwell back to the east by a stone-filled channel through the woodland. Details on how this is to be undertaken safely without impacting on the woodland is outlined within paragraph 10.99 of the committee report. Attenuation is provided by an attenuation tank, and in terms of foul drainage, this is to connect into new foul drains and the proposed pumping station, which will connect into the existing combined sewer at the west of the development. Yorkshire Water have raised no objections to this, and both these elements fall outside the Tanner Wood 15-metre buffer zone. 6 affordable dwellings are to be provided on site, and they are located here and here. As mentioned previously, we have a public right-of-way which runs along the western boundary of the site, and a link connection is to be provided, which you might just be able to see there. Boundary treatments include a mix of 1.8 metre high closed board timber fencing, 1 high screen walling and 900mm dry stone walls. To ensure these boundary treatments are suitable, these will be secured via condition prior to their installation. In terms of parking, all properties are shown to have sufficient dedicated off-street parking for either driveways or garaging. 7 visitor spaces are also proposed within the site. Where properties do not benefit from a garage, a shed is shown within the amenity space. Just while we've got this plan up, I note that in the committee update, we have received some comments in relation to pieces of land being landlocked. Just to point out now, behind plot 17, it doesn't lead right up to the red line boundary of the site, and there's a slight access allowed from the public right-of-way into these pieces of land to the rear of the sites that might be useful moving forward. Moving on to access, so this is to be from A635 Barnsley Road by a simple priority junction, as shown on the drawing. This includes a pedestrian refuge island to the east and formation of a curbed and surface footway adjacent to the informal crossing to the south side of Barnsley Road. This is to be carried out within a Section 278 agreement, and a visibility display to the left of 120 metres is to be provided and shall remain unobstructed, with the wall set behind the sightlines and the full display offered for adoption within a Section 38 agreement. This will be secured by a condition. An independent Stage 1 RSA and design response has been provided regarding the access arrangements associated with the site, which have been considered and addressed accordingly. As members will have seen on site, the site's existing ground level is set lower than the public highway and adjacent neighbouring properties. However, to create suitable access into the site, ground levels would be raised at the access point and filtered with the use of retaining walls down into the site following the existing contours. This will allow an adoptable access to be created at a suitable gradient. In terms of the provision of housing on site, 7 different house types are proposed. These are shown within the table here. In terms of housing mix, as mentioned earlier, 6 affordable dwellings are to be provided, and these comprise of 3 2-bed properties, 3 3-bed properties, and 10 UIs have been agreed to be 2 first homes, 3 social affordable rent, and 1 other. It is acknowledged that in terms of market housing, all of these properties are to be 4 5-bedroom detached dwellings and therefore are on the larger side. Whilst this is a negative to the proposal, a housing mix report which seeks to set out the justification of the requirement of larger homes has been provided by the applicant. Justification includes, but is not limited to, the increased need for home working space, the Council's lack of 5-year housing land supply, the affordable housing and housing mix SPD being guidance and not policy. The site is also unable to be developed out of 72 dwellings due to unexpected site constraints, such as Tanner Wood. The applicant has said that should 72 dwellings have been provided, a better mix would have been presented. The loss of developable area has impacted upon the viability of the site, and should the mix have been amended once more during the application process, the applicant would have needed to go through the viability process again. So whilst this is a negative of the proposal, obviously we had the designation of Tanner Wood as ancient woodland, which has resulted in the reduction in developable land. The applicant has provided the justification statement, and whilst the weight we would give to each of the arguments in that statement does vary, this is a housing allocation and we have the offer in front of us, so that's where we are with this one. In terms of properties, so this is one of the market properties. This is Naples, it's a 5-bed detached property, simple and contemporary in design, including front dormers and an integral garage. This one shows one of our affordable units, T2. It's a 3-bed property and again it's quite simple in design. I will note that the CGI image does show a red brick property, but this isn't the case. Dwellings are to be built using artificial stone with grey concrete roof tiles, except for plots 1 and 3, which will be finished in natural stone. Nevertheless, details of materials are to be secured via condition. This slide just shows a couple of street scenes facing onto Barnsley Road, and this is plots 1 and 3 and plots 3 and 9, which face towards Tanner Wood and the proposed public open space. As you can see, the dwellings are stepped down into the site, and this is due to the slope topography of the land to enable level plateaus for the dwelling. To conclude, the principle of developing the site for housing is deemed to be acceptable, and whilst the density is significantly lower than the recommended housing allocation, and the housing mix does depart from the expectations of the Council's housing mix SPD, given the constraints identified throughout the planning process, these departures are considered to have been justified by the applicant, and the harm is not considered to outweigh the presumption in favour of sustainable development established by the Council's lack of a 5-year housing land supply. A full policy compliant Section 106 package has been agreed with the applicant. This is outlined at the top of the committee report, but does include 6 affordable dwellings, on-site and off-site public open space, education, sustainable travel, and management and maintenance. Officers therefore recommend approval of the application. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. So we have some public speakers for this one. So same as previous, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. The first person we've got is Alan Phillips. So Alan, you'll have 3 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chair, Committee. Thank you for letting me speak on behalf of the Jones Ton Company. My position there is Commercial Manager, and I have several reservations regarding this development. We're a small engineering firm that make precision components for the oil and for automotive industry as well as building products. These are manufactured to a very fine tolerance, And whilst production will be underway manufacturing these houses, we have a worry about vibration that could eat its way into the building and cause problems with the machines that are very, very precise machines for manufacturing. That alone said, there's also a risk of dust being raised, and the amount of traffic going in and out of that site would have a detrimental effect towards manufacturing. On that point, just as rather than being the commercial manager of the Jones Tool Company, but somebody that uses this site on a regular basis, as you can see on the drawing, we come down, or I approach the buildings on 198 where our factory is. I approach it from Doncaster end or from Barnsley end, coming down the road and turning into what is the Jones Tool Company at 198 Barnsley Road. Now, of an evening, I leave that site, and I can tell you, on a regular basis, you cannot see round that corner that leads on past the Jones Tool Company and further on. You cannot see round that corner, and you have to be very, very cautious getting out of that entrance and exit to that site. I feel if you put something else in the place that's the entrance and exit to this site directly opposite, then you're causing issues there that could fundamentally cause serious traffic issues. So it's not just the fact of our manufacturing could be affected detrimentally, it's also on a personal level. I wouldn't like to think of somebody putting an access point directly opposite our exit point where there could be a conflict with vehicles coming in and out. Thank you.
Thank you. So our next speaker is Tim Jones. Tim.
Hi, my name's Tim Jones. I live at 196 Barnsley Road. The entrance opposite is, or proposed entrance opposite, appears to me to be built, looked at purely from the developer's point of view. Further to my colleague, we are now further down towards the Dimmersdale viaducts, and all the trees on the outside of the road are all TPO'd. When we drive out in the night, we have to quickly cross the road. Now you're putting an opposite entrance opposite us. I'm not too sure how this is all going to work. You've also proposed a bollard further up the road, outside 201. All the cars park outside 175, 179, 179, 201, 202, 202. The road doesn't appear to be wide enough. Highways appear to have said it's okay. I'm not 100% sure. So I don't know. I have proposed that this entrance gets moved further to the east. You've already said that you've taken some part of some green belt land under special circumstances. Not sure why you can't go a little bit further. It would alleviate a lot of problems. On the second point, I'm also own some land that is next door to this proposal. It was actually initially part of the initial housing development scheme. It was painted over, and Kirklees seemed to have ignored it. I had correspondence with a gentleman called Richard Gilbert, who was the planning officer at the time, and he confirmed it appeared that Kirklees had made some kind of mistake, and then he would go back to the planning officials. This was in May 22. I have had no correspondence since, apart from last night or this morning from the strategic planning officer. Not only have I had no correspondence back saying why was our land ignored when we could maybe have developed on it, and secondly, it is now under this proposal landlocked. Now, somebody has come back to me and said that you can get access to it now via the rear of plot 17. I cannot see where you can get this access. There are two separate pieces of land, not one, there are two. Now, if somebody can point out how I can get to this land, I'll be more than grateful. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Tim. The next person is Jeremy Child.
Good afternoon, members committee. I'm speaking on behalf of Techwell. I'm normally here in the position of trying to get applications through for clients, but my client, Mr. Jones, is sufficiently concerned about the access which he's just mentioned. Just a few points for sort of members to consider. Whilst the highway statement and the road safety audit sort of conclude that there's no design issues, we have a bit of a sort of conflict here because Tim's got the existing engineering works which vehicles have to reverse into or reverse out of, because there's it being a sort of an old works, there's an insufficient turning for large HGVs. There's an interim situation here where if this development goes ahead with the bollard, etc., there could be an increased effect on road safety. It would appear to me, I'm not a highways expert, I'm an architect, but it's fundamentally wrong that the entrances are in such close proximity. And whilst it's welcome that the speed limit has been reduced to 40 miles an hour due to the development just down the road, a stationary vehicle at night, unlit on the side like an HGV, you've got the woods that Tim mentioned, 40 miles an hour could be a life-changing or fatality. And I just feel that officers should just go back to the drawing board with the applicant on the highways grounds and endeavour to find a safer egress. We're not against the development per se. We obviously recognise housing developments and stuff, but given the extant access that is approved for housing on the adjacent side of the road, when that is delivered, there might not be an issue, but you're assuming, or the experts are assuming, that Tim's engineering works might not be there, and vehicles or large vehicles exiting an old site and going in slowly, sideways at night and in the winter with young children is a serious concern. And we do respectfully think that this application should be refused on highway grounds due to the proximity of the two entrances. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next I've got Roger Bedford.
Hello, yeah, I'm Roger Bedford, a resident whose property borders directly onto the north side of the developments. So given the limited time, I'll focus on my biggest concern, which relates to the proximity, elevation and orientation of the properties numbered 20, 21 and 22 on the plan. These properties directly face the rear of my house, number 23, with clear line of sight into the bedrooms and living areas on the ground floor and first floor of my property. Can I briefly note that this plan has changed quite recently, in fact most recently the 8th of April, and I only became aware of these changes very recently, and I do wish that greater effort had been made to ensure that impacted residents are being kept informed. Nonetheless, moving on, I have reviewed the new plans and I still want to raise the issues. I note that in section 10.49 of the planning officer's reports that was attached to the meeting pack, the planners concluded there are no significant concerns in respect to overlooking, and I do not agree with this comment. The separation distance between my property and the three properties I mentioned is 22 metres. Previously it had been 21, so it has changed slightly. And while this meets the minimum 21 metre standard as per the Kirklees House Builders Design Guide, the plan does not adequately account for the elevation difference of approximately 5 metres. That's shown in section C of the strata plan. So it's significantly higher, the properties behind and directly overlooking. There are several points raised about topography and that is meant to mitigate the risks of that. So, for example, within the house builders plan, it says longer distances between buildings may be necessary if steep topography on the site, which presents challenging relating to overlooking. And the Kirklees local plan also states the distance between buildings should reflect the local development densities, take into account topography, and still ensure the design and development does not allow to overlooking. So in conclusion, the lack of effective measures to mitigate this will impact the privacy and requires reorientation or increased separation distances. I'm running out of time, so I will cut to the chase, and that is to to mitigate the substantial adverse impact, what I would like to see is the properties 21, 22 and 23 reoriented by 90 degrees such that they are side on to my property. Now, having looked at the plan, I think that could be easily achieved. There is an existing roadway which it could face onto within the current plan, and I don't think it would require substantial reworking by the developers or substantially impact those properties.
Okay, thank you. And then we have Mike Drury.
Good afternoon. My property is one of a number that borders the northern end of the site, and I have a serious worry which appears to have been totally ignored, but which could possibly be mitigated against. I'm here also speaking for my neighbours, one of whom is on holiday, another one is elderly and infirm, so it's not just my property. Our gardens and possibly our properties stand to be seriously damaged. Everyone understands that water fundamentally flows downhill. Existing houses on the northern boundary in Broomhouse Close and Inkerman Way are lower down than the proposed site. And that's before any raised plateaus are created for the new properties, which is part of the plan. On occasions, our gardens already are waterlogged to a degree from water flowing both off the field and through the soil. Compacted earth, tarmac and raised land will greatly exacerbate the problem. On the 10th of January this year, the Council Lead Local Flood Authority posted one sentence to the new plans, which was, our previous comments dated July 2023 still stand. In July 2023, the same department appears to have not made reference to the issue that I've just outlined. And as far as myself as a layperson can understand, policies LP27 and LP28, the flood risk and drainage, do not seem to address this very site-specific problem. I submitted this potential problem along with diagrams and annotations of the applicant's drawings on the 17th of January, 25th of January and 4th of March this year, fully explaining the issue, with no response forthcoming since. I've heard nothing whatsoever. The only hint of the flooding problem in the report for this meeting is 3.13. Batters would be used along the north of plots 23 and 30. These batters, I would point out, would slope into our gardens. The section on page 30, flood risk stroke drainage, 10.80 onwards, assumes that all runoff water will flow west to east to the attenuation tank. Patently not true, because that would defy physics. I've been advised by a civil engineer that a French land drain along the northern boundary leading into Halywell Back is the obvious solution, which the almost completed development to the west of this new one has already implemented, so they've been able to do it. There's been no acknowledgement of the problem, let alone any mention of a solution. I can't understand how this serious issue can continue just to be ignored when there may be a simple solution. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so go now to Councillor Bamford. Again, you've got 5 minutes.
Thank you. My main concern with this is the density. Even though we've got a buffer zone for Tanner Wood, we're still actually going into Tanner Wood, even though they've got these 30 houses on it. The density, we've just seen an application come through. They're saying that they can't, because of the topography and the awkward shape, and especially Tanner Wood, we can only get this amount of houses on. We can get double, they've got double in the last one we've just determined on 1.9 acres against their 1.49. So building big houses, 4 and 5 bedroom houses in Denbydale is just not what we need. We need houses that the elderly can move into. They jump at them, they release big family homes. We also need starter homes, we need affordable homes to get the young in, because if my daughter can't live in the area, she's had to move out. And I get this story from residents regularly, that there are no houses in Denbydale, they are being forced out into cheaper areas to find housing. Well, there just aren't any two-bedroom houses. A bit of a dig at the planning department. This should have been master planned with the other site next door. We wouldn't have had the issue then with the highways, with the junction there, because we'd have all come out of the other one. We think we've got a pumped sewage solution on there, which is no good. And I do mirror the concerns about drainage. I've visited houses down there that do get runoff and have had runoff from the site through their gardens. It is definitely an issue. But the housing, the density is my main concern. We should have more houses on there. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Simpson.
Thank you very much, Chair. The principle of housing is established and we don't have a few millions quid's worth of coal under this one, so this feels slightly less controversial than the last discussion. But obviously it's very rare that an application will come to this committee because it's so popular. So obviously I've just got a couple of issues that residents have raised with me, and I'm sure Tim as well, and I just want to ask a couple of questions in relation to them. One of the main issues, and this was particularly with regard to the initial application, which has now been replaced by this one, was about overlooking, particularly in relation to income and way. The changes that have been made to the application since the first one have mitigated some of the worst of this, but I know some residents, particularly those on income and way, remain concerned about that. So I just ask the committee to give that issue due consideration and potentially ask officers if they think there's any other mitigations that might be reasonable, which would help in making sure that this is the best potential development that it could possibly be. And as Tim's just mentioned, I know that flooding and water runoff has been an issue for residents on Income and Way in the past. Safety on Barnsley Road is something that comes up all the time as well. You've heard it mentioned regarding the visibility from one of the residents earlier and some other specific issues. I was out door knocking there a few months ago. Myself and our Member of Parliament knocked on the door of every property on Barnsley Road on this particular Saturday morning. The issue that came up most regularly was not the winter fuel allowance, it was the safety and speed of cars on Barnsley Road. This is something that we discussed a lot with the previous application, and obviously the speed limit change has happened. At that time, it's gone down to 40. I asked if it could be 30 at the time. That was rejected. I suspect I'm not going to get that through just by raising it now. But it continues to be a concern for residents. So I just would ask the committee, when you hear the public speakers that you've heard already talking about issues regarding the safety of the road, that is something that's broadly reflected by a significant number of residents in that area as well. And then finally, just on the housing mix, obviously very pleased that attempts not to include any affordable housing have been dealt with, and that we've got an application that does include some affordable units in the mix. Like others, I'm still concerned about how the mix that is in the application is disproportionately 5-bedroom properties. I believe the report states that the applicant thinks that if there was a more equitable mix, that may make it unviable. I wanted to ask if we've given similar scrutiny and consideration with regards to that viability claim as we did with the affordable housing claim, which was not backed up, and then obviously the application changed. Because obviously if it were the case that we've done diligent scrutiny on that claim, and it is the case that it would be an unviable site with a more equitable housing mix, then it is what it is, and we consider it on that basis. But if it isn't the case, and it's just maximising profit, and we have a less equitable mix of housing than we could otherwise have, obviously it would be a shame to lose that opportunity to have that on this site. So I just ask the committee to explore those in their considerations as well. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. And we have, on behalf of the applicant, Katie Milnes.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Chair and members. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today. I'm Katie Milnes, Planning Manager at Strata. For those of you that don't know Strata, we're an established family-owned business based in Yorkshire. We build around 650 homes every year across Yorkshire and the Midlands, and alongside building new homes, we want to make meaningful change in and around the communities we create. We work with local charities, fundraising and volunteering, and this year we've partnered with Roundabout Homeless Charity, providing young people with shelter, support and critical life skills. We also spend time in schools, at careers events, running workshops and carrying out mock interviews. Our proposal is to deliver 30 high-quality homes upon this allocated site, including 6 affordable homes in line with local policy. We've worked really hard with Kirklees Council since 2021 to bring forward high-quality housing on this site whilst taking full appreciation of its various constraints which weren't known when the site was allocated. The main constraints we've designed around are the ancient woodland, the site's access and the site's levels. Our homes will overlook the ancient woodland to the east, where we've ensured a 15-metre buffer as agreed with offices and Natural England. And the ancient woodland will be retained and protected fully from public access to enable this habitat to flourish and thrive. We've worked closely with ecology and landscaping specialists to create an area of public open space, achieving a biodiversity net gain well in excess of 10%. And the proposed access arrangement has been established by working with the Council's highways officers to create an access which incorporates adequate visibility displays, traffic calming features and crossing facilities, all of which have been assessed via a road safety audit. And moving on to our homes themselves, these will comprise of 7 different house types. 6 affordable homes are to be provided, which will be 2 and 3 bedrooms and range in tenure, and the proposed open market homes largely consist of 5-bedroom dwellings. This mix has been informed by early soft marketing exercises, which has outlined a demand for family-sized housing alongside the known shift in housing aspirations post-COVID. The homes will be built from natural and reconstituted stone, and every home will have PV panels and electrical vehicle charging points to promote carbon reduction. The proposal delivers all Section 106 requests, totalling £135,000 towards sustainable travel, education and off-site recreational facilities. And overall, the proposals have been designed by working with Kirklees Council and are in accordance with both national and local planning policies. The proposals would enable a truly sustainable development to be brought forward on a site which is allocated for housing. We therefore kindly ask that you follow the Planning Officer's recommendation for approval. Thank you.
Thank you. So I've had our last speakers. There was a couple of points raised that might just be worth going back on. So just on the highways and the access, I don't know, Chris, whether you can comment on that, just to cover off that point around the access opposite, etc.
Yeah, I mean, I think as Katie just mentioned, one of the things with this site has been finding the optimum position to form a safe access. As some of the councillors and other people have mentioned, speeds on Barnsley Road have been an issue. The speed was 50 miles an hour. It was reduced to 40 as part of the previous application, the west of Inkerman Court. This application has found that they did speed services as part of looking at this. Speeds were still, certainly westbound speeds approaching Denbydale were found to be more than 40. So finding an access, it had to be done in accordance with design manual roads and bridges, which was a higher design standard. Achieving the visibility displays dictated to some extent where we did position the access, and it has included a package of highway works to help reduce the speed still further, to enforce the 40 miles an hour. We've got a vehicle actuated sign about towards the end of the visibility display which flashes up, additional signing, road markings and an island which again will discourage overtaking and give that pressure of closing the carriageway in to get speeds down. So there's been a package of measures, and that's determined to some extent where the access has been produced, and it's why we need the third party land to achieve the visibility display that they needed. The access where it is now is opposite or slightly in between 2 private accesses on the south of Barnsley Road. I think there's the mill house and the engineering firm that was mentioned. Those are private access points. They have been taken into consideration when doing this. I mean, this is a simple priority junction to serve this development. It's not one with the right turn and an island there. I think
perhaps some people who were speaking may have seen some of the earlier access proposals which did include right turning, which might have made that a bit of a conflict there. We've now gone for a simple priority junction there, so that will avoid those conflicts. So they were taken into consideration. There has been an independent road safety audit undertaken on the layout, taking that into consideration, which hasn't raised any undue issues. Also, we are aware of the undetermined application on the engineering site for 3 residential units. That won't, officers aren't objecting to that, I don't see any other objections, but within planning, but we are aware that there is an application on there for 3, and this development will not impact on that being approved.
Thank you. And then Katie, there was just a couple of things on sort of the separation distance, which would be good to clarify, the drainage, drainage situation, and also what was asked about the viability of the actual housing mix.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so in terms of the dwelling-to-dwelling relationships, all the properties do provide a separation distance of 21 metres, and those at the bottom of the site do either turn sideways or they look out over rather than into the adjacent properties. If there is any side-to-side relationships, they exceed the 12 metres. That's the other recommendation. That's between habitable room windows and a blank side-facing wall, which is what does appear on the front of Barnsley Road and in some instances to the rear. In terms of drainage, whilst I do note neighbour concerns, the proposed development should result in a betterment to this situation. The proposed drainage scheme has accounted for the dwellings, the increase in hard standing on the site. It will all be drained and collected within the attenuation tank to the north-east, and that will be discharged at a controlled level similar to that of the existing greenfield into Halliwell Beck to the east. Whilst the residential gardens, the dwellings may result in the collection of some water, this will be less than the existing site, which is all greenfield and not controlled. And the agent has confirmed that French drains will be installed in rear gardens, just that such level of detail hasn't been outlined at this stage, but would be during the detailed design stage, which is covered by condition. Thank you. In terms of viability, Nick, am I okay too?
Yes. Through you, Chair. In direct answer to your question, Councillor, no, we didn't do different testings for different housing mixes. We did just do the viability testing on that submitted. That being said, the profit level above what was the agreed profit standard, 18.5% in this case, was minimal, and therefore you would very quickly start going below that if you were to start taking away the value of the higher units. So based on that information, while it's not been fully tested, we are satisfied that the scheme at the moment is viable, but to start making changes for lesser value units, even changing 1 into 2, it's not that straightforward, and it would likely take the scheme below the agreed viability profit level. Thank you.
Okay, members? Yeah, Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. It was just some clarification. There was a comment that some of the housing is overfacing as far as their property is concerned. I don't think there was any clarification whether that was correct, and if there was any mitigation that could be achieved by moving them. So I just wanted, I don't know if we've got the plan with neighbouring houses that we can see that, or whether we can clarify that that is the case. So that was one. We've covered the road junction, and then the other one was the drainage, where it's been said a couple of times, and I'm still slightly concerned that the drainage is correct, and would like to see, if possible, any sort of clarification on that the drainage is going to be and will be of no detriment to the residents. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, Katie, I don't know, is it your screen that we're looking at? I think when you answered the question earlier, you did answer the separation distance, but I think the point made was whether there had to be additional consideration given the topography, the differences in height, and whether they could be oriented differently, yeah.
Through you, Chair. Yes, in theory, they could be orientated differently, but the question is what is in front of us at the moment. As you can see from the elevations here, I think, if Katie, if you could zoom into CC, I believe this is the particular elevation of concern at the moment. It does comply with standard in that it is 21 metres. Ultimately, it's a case-by-case assessment as to whether different ground levels do dictate a greater distance being required than 21 metres. In this case, officers are satisfied that this relationship would be acceptable, and it is our advice to you that it could be supported. If members do have concerns with that, we can have that discussion, but we do feel this is an appropriate relationship that would not unduly prejudice the amenity of existing residents. Thank you. And I can come back on drainage afterwards if you want to have this discussion first.
Okay. Yeah, Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. So we're saying it's acceptable, but does it meet all the criteria as far as on facing other existing properties?
So in the SPD, it does talk about 21 metre separation distances, but then it does have a non-prescriptive paragraph, which I can't quote off the top of my head, but it does say due regard should be given to level differences. It's not got a prescriptive requirement such as 1 metre up means 1 metre additionality. It is a case-by-case assessment of the decision maker whether it is appropriate. So it complies with the 21 metres. The other paragraph is for the decision maker to take into account.
Can you go on to the drainage one as well, just so...
Yeah, of course. So through you, Chair, at the moment, rain and ground will hit the site and it will go into the ground and discharge via gravity to where it's going to go, going downhill. Some of that catchment will be towards the river, and as residents have said, some of it will be downhill towards the neighbouring properties. That has what we call the greenfield discharge rate. Approximately 3.5 litres a second will drain through the ground in towards those final discharge points. What we look to do as part of planning applications is to replicate that. So any water hitting the hard surface, that's the road, your roofs, your driveways, will be collected. It will go into the pipes. The pipes will redirect that to an attenuation tank. The attenuation tank is designed to be of a certain size to then have a discharge point that will release the water at a same discharge rate, that 3.5 litres per second per hectare. So the water will hit the ground, it will get collected by the pipes into the tank will store it and discharge it into the river. In terms of the gardens, at the moment that do back onto them, the discharge, that system does not pick up garden water. The rain will still hit those gardens, it will still percolate away, and that is the normal approach for gardens, to let it naturally percolate away. So it will presumably go similar to as it does at the moment for those gardens, but it will be a betterment because the entire field won't be discharging that way. It will just be the significantly reduced areas of the gardens. Thank you.
Councillor Armour.
Yes, thank you. I'm a little bit concerned about paragraph 8 of the committee report, or section 8 more correctly, and it tells me that the Woodland Trust object to the proposals on the basis of Tanner Wood. I'm a little bit worried that we seem to be ignoring this objection, because ancient and semi-natural woodlands, they are precious resources, and hesitant to approve anything that damages them. Thank you.
Okay, I'll bring some more and we can cover that after. Councillor Sokol.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, first of all, I would like to thank the resident who raised their concern. They've been very constructive, and appreciate what they say. They are not actually against the development, yeah, but they have some concern. The concern already, I think, Highways has answered. They have a high safety package, yeah, and other issues which will reduce the speed or reduce the make it safe, the access over there. Also, I understand what Councillor Bumforth have said about the housing. They need about two bedroom or 3 bedroom. But at the same time, I'm thinking sometimes, yeah, and I said in previous meetings, at this time when the cost of living is growing and some families are opted to live together as an extended family, and they need a 4 or 5 bedroom house. Yeah, It's not only in Denby, it's all over in Kirklees. There is a need for 4 or 5 bedroom. I know we need more 2 bedroom or 3 bedroom for young people or elderly people for single bedroom. But the previous application which we have just defer it, there are more 2 or 3 bedroom than 4 or 5 bedroom. So I'm not against that, because at the same time as the officers, they need to look in the development need to look on the viability. Yeah, they're not making much profit. Yeah, so if we ask them to redesign, yeah, so less number of 5 bedroom, 4 bedroom, they might increase the number of housing altogether. It might go over 30. Yeah. So I think the number of mixed houses, I think is fine to me. But again, if there are some concern from the residents, like drainage and other, I think we should give some delegate powers to officer to deal with those. Thank you. I'm not against the application.
Okay, Councillor Pinnock.
Thank you, Chair. There were 1 or 2 things that I thought were wrong with this application that when I was listening to the residents talking about drainage and about separation distances. I'm not totally convinced that the separation distance is adequate. All right, it might be mitigated by a bit of vegetation between the 2 houses, given that one set of houses is a good deal higher than the other one. But the point that struck me most was what Councillor Bamford said about the number of houses on this site. And I think given the existence of a designated ancient woodland, there's not enough houses here. And on a lot of occasions, I've been on planning committees a long time, and I can remember time after time people saying there's not enough houses on this site, and things getting refused for that reason. I hear what's said about viability, and to some extent I understand that, but sometimes I think the authority's got to put its foot down. And I would like to see a justification for the existence of all these 5-bedroom houses in Denby Dale. Does the strategic, I forget what it's called now, there are officers that deal with strategic housing. Do they say that's what's needed in Denby Dale? And I mean, they may say yes, in which case, fair enough. But I'm not quite convinced. So I'm tempted to refuse it at the moment, but I'll.
Well, I think I can let Nick come in, but I think the answer to that is that it doesn't comply, does it? Because we can see in there what the strategic housing gives us a proportion of what the kind of housing mix should be, and we're saying it doesn't meet that mix. The question we've got to answer is, that's the application before us. Our officers have managed to secure the affordable housing on the site.
Act accordingly.
They're considerate of the viability, so I guess that's for us to decide. But yeah, Nick, if you want to add anything.
Yeah, through you, Chair. I'll come back on Councillor Pinnock's point, and then I'll pick up on the Woodland Trust shortly thereafter. The housing mix and the density, officers are on balance accepting of it, but they are acknowledged, particularly the density, the housing mix, to be negatives of the proposal. Planning is a consideration of pros and cons. It is a negative, but we do need to consider the benefits. And as Councillor Thompson said on the earlier application, the lack of a 5-year housing land supply, while he does have his own concerns, I must stress to you as your officer, the MPPF is clear. We are in a tilted balance situation. We do have to look to support things unless there are clear and demonstrable reasons. Officers have set out that on balance, while lacking in some regards on the density and housing mixture, the harm of that is in this case justified. It is touched upon in the report. We can go into that detail if needs be, but it is set out. The harm is mitigated and the benefits are on balance acceptable. You are ultimately the decision makers. You can weigh it as you see fit, but we will put that to you as officers' interpretation of this balance. In terms of the Woodland Trust, from my reading, their principal concern is to do with the drainage channel approaching into it. They acknowledge and accept the buffer zone of 20 to 15 metres for the housing. Their concern is with the drainage channel. We are in a situation here where it's, well, drainage engineers tell us this is what we should do. We should discharge to the river, and the Woodland Trust is saying, well, we shouldn't go near the river because it's in the woodland. We've gone through this assessment principally with our own ecologist and our own arboriculturalists. On balance, that trench to provide the drainage channel can be done in a sympathetic and appropriate way, which will not harm both the arboricultural value of the ancient woodland and principally its ecological value. So notwithstanding the Woodland Trust's concerns, we acknowledge them, but we feel that they can be suitably designed to ensure the appropriate drainage arrangements are in place. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so we've had quite a bit of discussion. I guess from my perspective then, I'm happy to move the officer recommendation. I do have the concerns on the viability on the housing mix point, but I'm not sure we're on strong ground on that. Any, Councillor Sokol? Okay. So sure, we've moved and seconded that.
Okay, so you voted on the officer recommendation to approve, subject to the conditions set out in the report. You're delegating to the Head of Planning and Development, and also a Section 106 agreement with 5 heads of terms. Councillor Sokol?
For.
Councillor Lee Richards?
Abstain.
Councillor Pinnock?
Against.
Councillor Thompson?
Against.
Councillor Armour?
Abstain.
Councillor Homewood? That's 2 votes for, 2 against, 2 abstentions. You get a casting vote, Councillor Homewood. That's carried.
Thank you. Well, thanks everybody for coming to that one. So we'll give people 2 minutes if they want to leave the room. Yeah, we'll just break for 2 minutes. Okay. Right, we'll move on to the final item, agenda item 12. Louise, I think.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Louise Bearcroft and I'm a Senior Planning Officer in the Majors and Mineral team. So the site is land to the rear of Rose Street at Crossland Moor, where development for the erection of 19 single-storey dwellings has commenced and is substantially progressed. This slide shows the approved layout, and the photographs, which were taken this month, show the current progress on site. The plots circled in orange are substantially constructed, and those circled in blue are at foundation level. These photographs of the site show the plots yet to be substantially constructed, with the arrow pointing to Rose Street just visible in the distance. The application is not a planning application, but an application seeking to modify a legal agreement made under Section 106 of the Town and Country Planning Act. The application seeks to remove the obligation to provide 2 affordable housing units on site, which were previously secured via a Section 106 agreement. These are circle red on the site plan. The applicant has provided a viability assessment as evidence in support of their request. At the time of the original 2015 application, planning policy required that for brownfield sites, 15% of the total floor space be provided as affordable housing, equating to 3 units. The application was subject to a viability review at that time, which resulted in a reduced provision of 2 units being agreed. The obligations for Section 106 also included a public open space contribution off-site of £5,638, which has been previously paid. The applicant has submitted a viability appraisal, which asserts that only a 0% affordable provision would make the scheme viable. The applicant's viability assessment has been reviewed by an independent viability assessor appointed by the council. The key findings are that the applicant's profit level for 2 affordable units will be 2.57%, and the profit level for 0 affordable units would be 9.54%. Planning practice guidance indicates that a profit level of 15 to 20% of gross development value is generally considered to be a suitable return to developers. The council's assessor advises the LPA to consider a 15% profit on GDV as a baseline, and they conclude that a 9.54% profit is too low and beneath the range established within the NPPF, such that the applicant cannot viably deliver any affordable housing with the scheme. Furthermore, without delivering any affordable housing provision, the profit level is still beneath the range established within the NPPF. Officers concur with the assessment undertaken by the independent assessor that the previously required provision of 2 affordable units would result in an unacceptable profit level and represent an unviable scheme. In accordance with Section 106A of the Act, the evidence has demonstrated that the obligation no longer serves a useful purpose, and officers recommend that it is discharged. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We've got one speaker on behalf of the applicant. Tom Wislin? Yep. Tom. 3 minutes. Yep.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, all. I'm Tom Breeslin, speaking on behalf of the applicant from Urbana Town Planning. I'd like to reiterate some of what Louise has just said there and clarify from the outset that this is not a planning application, an application for a planning permission. This is an application under Section 106A of the Town and Country Planning Act to modify a planning obligation previously secured via a legal agreement. Specifically, it seeks to remove the requirement to provide 2 affordable housing units secured as part of the 2015 planning permission. At the time of this committee, the development is well advanced on site, as Louise has said, with 10 houses nearing completion. A certificate of lawfulness confirms that works were commenced lawfully under the 2015 permission. The issue before you relates solely to viability. At the time the permission was granted, the Council's policy position required 15% of the gross internal floor area to be delivered as affordable housing on brownfield sites. However, following a viability review at the time, that requirement was reduced to just 2 units. The current application seeks to remove the obligation entirely on viability grounds. To support this request, the applicant has submitted a detailed viability assessment. In accordance with the best practice and national guidance, that assessment has been subject to a thorough independent review by the Council's appointed consultants. The main area of difference between the applicant and the assessor concerned the sales values of the completed units. However, even when using the assessor's higher sales figures, which would increase gross development value by nearly 6%, the resulting profit with 2 affordable units is just 2.57%. That is well below the 15% profit margin on GDV generally accepted as the minimum viable return as set out in the national guidance. Even with no affordable housing at all, the scheme returns a profit of only 9.54%, still significantly below the 15 to 20% range referenced in the National Planning Policy Framework as a suitable return for development schemes. This is a clear indication of a scheme on the margins of viability. Members may recall that a separate application for a similar scheme was refused in 2022, and that application was supported by its own viability evidence. At the time, the Council's independent assessor concluded that the scheme could support the delivery of affordable housing. However, there is a key distinction. The 2022 assessment was based off forecasted and assumed abnormal costs, whereas this current application reflects actual evidence costs incurred on site. Those costs are now known and have been independently accepted by the Council's consultants. Put simply, this is a site where the abnormal development cost has significantly impacted viability, and that position has been robustly verified. The legal and policy framework is clear. The evidence has been independently tested and the conclusions are not in dispute. We therefore ask members to approve the application today and allow this site to come forward to completion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Armour, you want to come in first?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Generally speaking, I am very unsympathetic to developers who come back and say we want to be let off this or that or the other. I think by and large, they're in business, they should get it right first time. Having said that, having read the papers, having listened to the witness, it's always been a bit of a marginal development as this one, obviously. Things have gone against them, and I'm very struck by the fact the council or the planning department accepts the figures, the viability figures. So in this case, I'm prepared to move the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
I've got a flurry of hands at Councillor Thompson. You were first, but seconded. Does anybody else? Councillor Pinnock?
I think I agree because when you hear somebody say that with the current arrangement they'll make only 2% profit, even I would think that's not
margin of error.
It's way outside the margin of error, really, it's unfortunate. Does indicate what a marginal activity trying to provide affordable housing actually is. You know, you sort of wish it hadn't happened like that, but it has, and fair enough.
Yeah. Councillor Sokol, you want to say?
Yeah. Sorry. I agree with both, Councillor Armour and Councillor Pinnock. Yeah. I think this site, I know very well site. This site has been surrounded by one side. One side is railways, other side is terrace houses, right, and somewhere surrounded by unpleasant situation there. I think a developer will be lucky if he get many people are interested to buy those houses. I think the price is already low, very low, 150, 60, something like affordable houses. So I'm happy to go along with Councillor Ahmed and Councillor Pinnock to approve officer recommendation.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, Sheila, I think we've had that moved and seconded.
So you're voting on the officer recommendation to approve and the issue of the decision notice to be delegated to the head of planning and development. Councillor Sokol?
For.
Councillor Lee Richards?
For.
Councillor Pinnock?
For.
Councillor Thompson?
For.
Councillor Armour?
For.
Councillor Homewood?
For.
That's agreed, unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. And that's all the items on the agenda, so I'm happy to close the meeting.